Barbara Hutton, the Woolworth heiress and one of the wealthiest women in the world, had just one dream: to find a true Prince Charming who would love her for herself, not her staggering fortune. Yet, as she navigated the glittering world of high society, she discovered that her status as an eligible heiress made her a target rather than a beloved figure. Instead of finding genuine love, she became entangled with a string of fortune hunters, men who wooed her with false affection, only to drain her wealth and abandon her in scandal. Each failed romance left her more disillusioned, pushing her further into the clutches of depression and addiction. Alcohol and pills became her escape from the loneliness that no amount of money could cure. But the betrayals, the public humiliations, and the emotional devastation were only the beginning. 7 marriages, 7 shattered illusions. By the end, Barbara was little more than a ghost in designer rags, clinging to one last light: her son, Lance. Then came the tragedy that didn't just break her, it consumed her forever. Find out more about it in Barbara Hutton's fairy tale Life Turned Nightmare. Barbara Hutton was born into a world of unimaginable privilege, the heiress to the Woolworth dynasty, destined for opulence from the moment she took her first breath in 1912. But behind the gilded doors of her family's mansions, luxury came at a brutal cost. Her father, Franklin Hutton, was a Wall Street titan with a Midas touch in business and a monstrous streak in private. A relentless philanderer, a violent drunk, and a man who treated his wife with cold contempt, he turned their home into a battleground. And Barbara, their only child, was left to navigate the wreckage. Then came the day that shattered her world forever. At just 4 years old, Barbara tiptoed into her mother's bedroom, expecting a gentle awakening, only to find Edna Woolworth Hutton lifeless in her bed. The official cause? A sudden illness. The whispers: suicide by poison, a desperate escape from Franklin's cruelty. Whatever the truth, Barbara's mother was gone, and, with her, the last flicker of warmth in the child's life. What followed was a childhood of exile. Franklin, indifferent to his daughter's grief, discarded her like an inconvenient heirloom, shuttling her between indifferent relatives and elite boarding schools. She had palaces, but no home, servants, but no love, a fortune, but no family. By the time she reached adolescence, Barbara had learned the cruelest lesson of all. Her name opened doors, but it couldn't keep the loneliness out. And this was only the beginning of her downfall. By 15, Barbara Hutton was already living like a woman of the world, ensconced in her own Manhattan apartment. Her every whim funded by the staggering $26.1 million inheritance. That's over $400 million today, left to her by her grandmother. Most teenagers worried about school dances and curfews. Barbara navigated a gilded minefield of gold diggers and social climbers, all drawn to her not for her wit or warmth, but for the weight of her fortune. Yet, for all her wealth, she was still a girl, one who craved belonging. And in the roaring world of 1920s, high society, belonging meant excess. Her 18th birthday wasn't just a party, it was a spectacle. While breadlines snaked through Depression-era America, Barbara dropped $60,000 and nearly $1 million a day on a single night of champagne, caviar, and performances by legends like Maurice Chevalier. The press savaged her. The poor little rich girl, they sneered, painting her as a heedless heiress dancing on the graves of the starving. Did she retreat? She doesn't know the meaning of the word, so she fled to Europe and doubled down. And there it was, soon after, when Barbara Hutton first encountered husband number 1, Alexis Mindavani, at a Parisian soiree in 1932. The meeting seemed serendipitous, another charming expatriate in her glittering social circle. But behind Alexis's polished veneer lurked a predator. The so-called prince, a title as questionable as his intentions, had already mapped his conquest: Barbara's fortune. There was just one complication. His current wife happened to be Barbara's friend, Louise Van Allen. What followed wasn't romance, but a meticulously staged con. Alexis and his sister Rusi, operated like a well-rehearsed theatrical troupe, with Russi directing from the wings. Their scheme required two acts. First, manufacture an inescapable scandal. Second, leverage Barbara's fragile public image to force marriage. The trap sprung during a Mediterranean holiday in San Sebastian. While Alexis lured the vulnerable heiress to a secluded villa, Russi ensured an accidental discovery, assembling a horrified audience including Louise and society reporters. The stage scene of Barbara in flagrante with a married man became front-page fodder across Europe. Fleeing to Paris provided no refuge. Russi's threats followed like a specter: marry Alexis or face complete social ruin. The July 1933 wedding at Sainte Trinité Church was less a celebration than a corporate merger. 20-year-old Barbara, swathed in Valentino lace, gained a tarnished title. Alexis, smirking through his vows, secured unlimited access to her fortune. Their first private moment as husband and wife revealed the truth beneath the fairy tale facade. "In my country," Alexis hissed, "a wife's wealth becomes her husband's property." The words landed like a sentence, because for Barbara, that's exactly what it was. Barbara Hutton's fairy tale marriage began with a brutal awakening on her wedding night. As the newlyweds retired to their suite, Prince Alexis Mdivani coldly informed his bride she was too fat, a cruel opening salvo in what would become years of psychological warfare. Though photographs from the era reveal a slender, elegant woman, Barbara internalized this vicious critique, developing an anorexia so severe she would eventually waste away to a mere 90 pounds. The abuse only intensified when she turned 21 and gained full access to all her inheritance. Alexis immediately helped himself to a $1 million dowry payment and began squandering her inheritance on polo ponies, custom-tailored suits, and lavish gifts for his mistresses, all while Barbara starved herself to meet his impossible standards. By 1935, even the famously tolerant heiress had reached her limit. The divorce settlement left Alexis fabulously wealthy, but freed Barbara from her gilded cage, only to plunge her into an even darker nightmare with husband number 2, Danish Count Kurt von Haugwitz Reventlow. Where Alexis had been calculating and manipulative, Reventlow was openly violent, beating Barbara so severely she was repeatedly hospitalized. His psychological manipulation proved even more damaging. He convinced her to renounce her American citizenship in 1938, sparking national outrage. Protesters burned her effigy outside Woolworth stores, while columnist Walter Winchell branded her the spoiled brat of capitalism in his widely syndicated takedown. Amid this turmoil came one bright spot: the birth of her son Lance in 1936. But the pregnancy, complicated by years of eating disorders, left Barbara unable to bear more children. When her marriage to Reventlow inevitably collapsed, the ensuing custody battle became a vicious struggle that only ended when Barbara's legal team finally prevailed. As she entered her 30s, a devastating pattern had emerged. Each marriage began with hope, descended into abuse, and ended with Barbara paying millions to regain her freedom. Yet despite these traumatic experiences, the world's wealthiest woman remained tragically optimistic that the next prince, the next title, the next marriage might finally bring her the fairy tale ending she so desperately craved. That maybe, just maybe, the third time's a charm, a longing that would lead her into ever more dangerous alliances in the years to come. Barbara's romantic escapades took a glamorous turn when she became entangled with the eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes. Their passionate but short-lived affair unfolding in luxurious secrecy at London's Savoy Hotel. She would later describe Hughes with paradoxical admiration. He doesn't bombard you with ideas, doesn't pry, never argues. The charming thing about Howard is that he isn't charming, yet their physical relationship proved disappointing. Hughes, ever the perfectionist, became frustrated when he couldn't control Barbara's pleasure as precisely as his aircraft designs, abandoning their liaison the moment she failed to perform to his exacting standards. This disappointment soon faded when fate delivered a far more dashing suitor during an Atlantic crossing. The debonair husband number 3, Cary Grant, whose genuine affection offered Barbara her first taste of reciprocal love. Unlike her previous partners, Grant treated her with unwavering respect, even forming a tender bond with young Lance. For once, Barbara found herself with a man who wanted neither her fortune nor her social connections, but simply her heart. Yet this fairy tale romance carried the seeds of its own destruction. Grant's devotion to his acting career baffled Barbara. Why would her prince choose work when her millions could provide endless leisure? As she jet-setted between palaces and parties, his continued film commitments left her feeling abandoned. The growing rift drove Barbara to an act of betrayal so profound it would shatter their marriage, proving that even Cary Grant's legendary charm couldn't compete with the restless demons that haunted history's richest woman. In 1943, Barbara's restless heart led her to make an audacious play for fashion designer Oleg Cassini, despite his marriage to Hollywood starlet Jean Tierney. True to form, the Woolworth heiress approached romance like a business transaction. She instructed Cassini to offer his wife a cool $1 million to step aside. For Barbara, who had spent a lifetime acquiring priceless art and European titles, purchasing a husband seemed perfectly logical. But in a rare defeat for the billionaire, Tierney refused the payoff, choosing love over lucre. The humiliating rejection compounded Barbara's crumbling marriage to Cary Grant. Even Hollywood's most perfect gentleman couldn't satisfy her bottomless emotional needs. Their divorce marked not just the end of a marriage, but the end of Barbara's California dream, sending her fleeing across the Atlantic with her fragile ego in tatters. The exiled heiress attempted to reinvent herself in Tangier's sun-drenched decadence, purchasing a sprawling palace where she played hostess to international jet-setters. Still chasing the royal fantasy that had eluded her since Alexis Mdivani, she set her sights on husband number 4, Russian Prince Igor Trubetskoy. Their whirlwind romance followed the now familiar pattern: extravagant courtship, hasty marriage, and almost immediate disillusionment. But this time, the rejection cut deeper. It was the prince who filed for divorce, a devastating blow that sent Barbara spiraling into depression. As she wandered the marble halls of her Tangier palace alone, the cruel truth became undeniable. Each new marriage left her poorer, more broken, and further from the fairy tale she so desperately pursued. The woman who could buy anything in the world remained powerless to purchase the one thing she truly needed: unconditional love. If Barbara's previous husbands had been disappointments, her 5th marriage plunged her into outright farce. Enter husband number 5, Porfirio Rubirosa, a professional charmer with a reputation as polished as it was predatory. The Dominican playboy had already seduced and discarded her rival Doris Duke, making Barbara his next logical target in a lifelong con game targeting wealthy heiresses. When Doris learned of their affair, her fury was volcanic. She was convinced Barbara had pursued Rubirosa purely out of spite, a final act of one-upmanship in their decades-long feud. But the real victor was Rubirosa himself, who watched with amusement as 2 of the world's richest women fought over a man who loved none of them. By now, Barbara's once radiant beauty had been hollowed out by decades of starvation and substance abuse. On their wedding day, she wore black, a grim omen for a marriage that would never be consummated. While Rubirosa paraded his affair in the tabloids, Barbara endured the humiliation with numb resignation. The union lasted barely 6 months, collapsing under the weight of his infidelity and her disillusionment. Yet, even in failure, Barbara couldn't help but reward betrayal with absurd generosity. A coffee plantation, a fleet of polo ponies, a B-25 bomber, and $2.5 million vanished into Rubirosa's pockets as he sauntered off to his next conquest. Alone again, Barbara did what she always did. She scanned the horizon for another prince, another title, another fleeting chance at the fairy tale that kept slipping through her fingers. Barbara's 6th marriage offered a cruel twist of irony. For the first time, she'd found a man she genuinely loved, only to discover he could never love her back. German tennis star and husband number 6, Gottfried von Cramm, the dashing Baron von Cramm, became her most painful obsession. Despite knowing of his relationships with men, Barbara convinced herself her devotion could change him, a delusion that lasted 5 agonizing years. Even as von Cramm continued his affairs with male lovers, Barbara stubbornly clung to what actor Cliff Robertson would later call the love of her life, her refusal to accept reality making the eventual collapse all the more devastating. This pattern of willful self-deception reached its absurd climax with her final husband number 7, Raymond Doan. Unlike her previous aristocratic conquests, the undistinguished painter lacked even the pretense of nobility, until Barbara purchased him a 250,000 Cambodian princely title, that's about 2.5 million today, to verify yourself with a status, literally creating the royalty she craved. But as with all her marriages, the fairy tale dissolved, leaving her by 1970 a prematurely aged woman watching her inheritance dwindle alongside her hopes. With her health failing and romantic prospects exhausted, Barbara turned to her sole remaining anchor, her son Lance. But remember, fate, never kind to the poor little rich girl, was preparing its cruelest blow of all. It was a dark day in 1972 when Barbara's world shattered completely. Lance, her beloved son and last remaining anchor, defied warnings about the overcast weather and took off in his private plane, a reckless decision that ended in tragedy when the aircraft crashed. The loss destroyed what little resilience Barbara had left. Already weakened by decades of heartbreak, financial mismanagement, and failed marriages, she now faced the unbearable void left by her only child's death. The grief consumed her, accelerating both her physical and mental decline in a devastating downward spiral. Her body began mirroring the collapse of her spirit. A year before Lance's death, a simple stumble over a carpet had fractured her hip, an injury she neglected until it became irreparable. The once glamorous socialite who had danced through European ballrooms now found herself confined to wheelchairs or carried like invalid royalty. Some speculated her refusal to walk stemmed less from pain than from hiding her deteriorating eyesight, as the proud heiress couldn't bear the world witnessing her blindness. But these humiliations were merely prelude to her final, lonely act, a destitute ending for the woman who had once been the richest girl in the world. The very traits that had made her life so spectacularly tragic, her stubbornness, her pride, her desperate need for control, now conspired to isolate her completely as the curtain fell on her gilded nightmare. By the mid-1970s, Barbara Hutton had become a ghost haunting the suites of a Beverly Hills hotel, her final gilded cage. The death of Lance had extinguished her last spark of vitality, leaving her adrift in a world where former friends vanished like mirages once her fortune dried up. Stripped of both her wealth and the sycophants it attracted, she faced the cruel revelation that without money to distribute, she held no value to those who had feigned affection. Even her lawyers, those supposed guardians of her interests, had been quietly pilfering what remained of her dwindled inheritance. Yet, old habits persisted. Though forced to liquidate jewels and properties for survival, she still impulsively gifted money to strangers, as if hoping generosity might purchase the genuine connection that had eluded her all her life. The physical transformation was horrifying in its completeness. The vibrant debutante who had once dazzled society now lay bedridden in a perpetual haze of coke and cigarette smoke, her emaciated frame barely recognizable. She was very thin, gone, observed Oleg Cassini with mournful finality. The spirit was gone, the life was gone out of her. When death came in May 1979 via heart attack at age 66, it almost seemed a mercy until the shocking aftermath laid bare the full tragedy. Her bank account held a mere $3,500 to her name. What's worse, only 16 mourners could be troubled to attend her funeral. In the end, the woman whose name became synonymous to unimaginable wealth died as she lived, achingly alone, having proved that no fortune, no matter how vast, could ever compensate for the absence of true love. Millions lost to chasing affection and received nothing but heartbreak in return. Barbara Hutton's life was no happily ever after.